Welcome everyone to our webinar on systems thinking for complex sustainability challenges. This is a webinar where we will be answering any questions that you may have about our two-day open program that we are hosting at the University of Cambridge. We are CISL, the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, and we organize these two-day open programs as part of our executive education. This specific lab will be running on the 10th and 11th of March 2025. So I would say the Christmas break is the perfect time to think about whether you want to engage in some learning in the new year and perhaps even already commit to the learning by signing up already before we sell out. You can use the QR code to find the overview page on the Systems Thinking Lab. Applications are open right now. We already have quite a few applications that came in the last couple of months, and we expect to fill up quite soon. So make sure that you get your application in as soon as possible. Now, again, this webinar is for us to answer any questions that you may have about this learning program. So you can put your questions in the chat, which we will be moderating the chat of the webinar itself, but you can also have a look at the LinkedIn page and put your questions on LinkedIn in the events page. We will be reviewing those, and after my quick presentation and a whiz through the program, we will dive into your questions and try to answer as many as possible. If we don't get around to answering your question, make sure it's on the LinkedIn events page, and we will go in there after the event again and make sure that all your questions are answered. All right, let's get started. So a lot of sustainability challenges are complex, not complicated. And this is exactly what we're going to focus on during this lab. So very often we approach these really difficult sustainability challenges through the lens as if they were predictable, controllable, or designable, and something that you can dominate and control. But in fact, it's more like a living and complex system. So they're a lot more unpredictable, indeterministic, self-organizing, and emergent. And some of the types of complex sustainability challenges that you could be exploring is how can a Western superfoods company contribute to a decolonial sustainability approach for Bolivian quinoa farmers, for example? Or how can a small fashion startup spark an industry-wide conversation about human rights in the supply chain? These things are not controllable. So how do you actually show up with integrity? And that is what we're going to focus on during this lab. We are looking at systems thinking through the lens of that it requires us to think differently. So it's about shifting mindsets. This will be a 2-day program where you come to Cambridge and you will be joining us in Mattingly Hall. So you can see those pictures on the right. Those are from last time that we ran this lab. This is also at Mattingly Hall. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous grounds with very famous gardens. And on those 2 days, we will explore a few of those things, explore the economy as a living system. We will learn more about how your brain makes sense of complex phenomena. How do you actually think? And then we engage in a research-based learning method on ecological design thinking. We have a keynote, and I'm very excited about this. We have a keynote from Nora Bateson herself, and we will be talking about this during the Q&A a bit more. And we will identify systems interventions for a real-life case study. We will reflect on the practicalities of driving systems change from a business perspective. And we also have a brand new session about communicating complexity and how to do that with integrity. We have many more sessions and ways to engage in this topic, but this is just a few highlights. This is the faculty. So we have myself, Adam Lusby, Dr. Nikki Wallace, Chris Grantham, Phoebe Tickell, and Dr. Kate Simpson. And today with us, we have a few of the faculty members. When we went live, I couldn't see Adam Lusby yet in our lineup, so I'm wondering if he is there. I can't see it myself from this screen. So if Adam is not there, Nikki, can you go ahead and introduce yourself? And otherwise, Adam, please go ahead and start by introducing yourself.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I am here. I'm sorry for being late. Jumping on. I'm Adam Lasby. I'm the other half of Regenerate with Chris, who's on the call here, and I'm also a senior lecturer in entrepreneurship at the University of Exeter. So yeah, great to meet everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us. Nikki, please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Nikki Wallace. I am an academic at University of the Arts London. A lot of my research is focused in design for just transitions, and that tends to be the space that my teaching focuses on as well. Great to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Chris, you're also joining us today.
Hello, yes. So Chris Grantham, the other half of Regenerate, which we founded a couple of years ago. I spent a career in strategic innovation and sort of developed and ran the circular economy practice at an innovation company called IDEO. And our work at Regenerate really sits at the sort of the intersection of regenerative design, placemaking, business and service design, venture design, economics, biomimicry, and some inner development work as well. So we'll be very much driving sort of the sessions that are sort of on the wavelength of sort of building to think, kind of workshoppy, kind of very much generative design kinds of sessions to explore systems and their potential.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we have Phoebe and Kate who will be joining us during the lab. They're not here today. If you have any questions to any of these faculty members, Adam, Nikki, and Chris specifically, you can also make sure that you indicate that in your question. You can put questions in the chat box as we're going. We're collecting them for after this presentation. And again, you can also put those in the LinkedIn Q&A section in the LinkedIn event. Let's go over day 1 and day 2 and what the different intentions are for each of these days. So on day 1, we're very much looking at how do we engage with complex systems and how do we engage in those and within those systems. What are systems and how does this relate to sustainability? What are complex challenges and what is complexity? What do you think of when you're thinking of these complex sustainability challenges? What are the kind of things that you value or maybe overlook? How can you start thinking differently about this? Day 2, very much about agency and driving change. So a lot of our students and delegates that we engage with, they're mid to senior professionals that are often working in businesses, and they don't necessarily own a whole supply chain or they are not the CEO of that business. So how do you actually engage in driving systems change when you are not at the top? And how can you do that from within and also on different scales? So that agency piece, there's so much to that that can be really empowering in terms of driving change. And that's what we will be focusing on day 2. So how do you engage in these systems? How do you take part in changing systems when your power and agency is limited? How do you communicate about complexity? And what ways can business lead systems change with integrity? So that is a quick run through of kind of the storyline of these 2 days. We ran this program before, it was very successful. This is a quote from one of our students back then. So this is a student on the Masters in Sustainability Leadership, Kellyanne Kelso, and she joined for this lab, and then it really affected also how she approached her dissertation. So she was very positive about it, and we got lots of good feedback. And if you are interested in joining us in March, so the 10th and the 11th of March 2025, please do go to the webpage through the QR code on the screen and sign up there, or have a good read of our brochure and our descriptor of the 2-day course. Now, I'm going to take my slides down because I can only see my slides right now and nothing else. And then what we will be doing is we will start the Q&A. So Tom Norton is the program manager for this lab. and he will be taking all your questions that you put in the chats and on the LinkedIn page, and they will be directed to any of the panelists on this webinar. So I hope that you all got the QR code. I'm now just taking my screen down. Let me just stop sharing. Okay, perfect. Tom, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here with you today. As Emma mentioned, I'm the program manager from Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, responsible for delivering this program. And it's great to be talking with you today and excited to see some of the questions that are already coming through. So please continue to feed those through either on the GoTo platform or through LinkedIn Live as well. So we've got a number of questions already that have come through, which is fantastic. The first one, Emma, I'm going to throw to you, and then I've got some others that I think the faculty will be it'll be good to get their insights and perspectives on. Emma, there's a question's come through, which is what does developing a regenerative mindset mean, and why is it important for sustainability?
So when we look at how we're often addressing sustainability now, and when we're looking at research about that, so those patterns of thought, those ways of thinking about what are good solutions and how do we intervene in some of these really large scale and deeply entangled systems that we're having to deal with, we often see that it goes back to this part of our brain that is so comfortable with direct cause and effect. You know, something happens and then that has an effect on something else. But what we see in sustainability is that it's usually a range of different things happening at the same time, causing a systemic consequence. And that is really hard for us to grapple with because it's not necessarily something tangible or something that you can control. You're almost taking part in this bigger thing that is emerging. And this is a completely different way of being part of the sustainability movement. And this can, I feel like very often I feel like it's a bit looked down on because it's like, well, you should really have this kind of command and control, approach to sustainability and really have that kind of top-down, um, action-oriented strategy. However, this can be super impactful, profound, and also very serious from a business perspective as well. So it's not only from a citizen perspective. This lab is specifically aimed at business professionals that want to drive change and want to engage in that type of complexity that I described. And Chris, you're the
I'm just going
expert
to add
here
to
as
it from a
well.
commercial from a commercial perspective. A thought that came into my head was that a mindset that's around kind of enriching the systems that the business works through is kind of enlightened self-interest, because it really can help you identify and address risks, the existential risks to the business in terms of risks in the supply chain, for example. If the supply chain is dependent on degenerative systems, that's a serious risk for the business. If it grows something, for example, it all depends on a grown input. And then also, it can help you identify uh, essentially, rewards, value creation opportunities by reacting to the needs that are created out there by degeneration. So if you're enriching, you're responding to some very profound needs for regeneration, which are shared by businesses, by citizens, and so there's a whole range of innovation opportunities.
Thanks very much. Emma, there was a point that you mentioned in there which relates to another question which has come through, which is looking at the consequences and the outcomes from a systems perspective. And that question is, how much space do you give to consider not just the opportunities and innovation a change or a technology might bring, but also some of those downstream negative impacts?
Yeah, so this has everything to do with how do you engage in systems and how do you wish to intervene in those. And actually, Nikki is running that very first session on day 2 about how to design these interventions really intentionally. So Nikki, do you want to maybe take this one on?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, and I think the The approach that we look at, that I'll be bringing into the lab, looks at the system as multiple levels, and how these multiple levels kind of have dynamics that engage with one another that will influence or impact the way that change occurs across the system. And when we think about change, we think about the things that we might need to bring in and encourage. So we might need to bring in more regenerative kind of thinking. We might need to innovate in those kinds of spaces. But we also need to think about things that have to disappear, things that need to exnovate and be designed out. Because it's one thing to to bring in the new stuff, the wonderful new stuff, but if we're not letting go of the things that are problematic, we end up with a lot of tension in relation to the kinds of changes that we're trying to realise. So being quite attentive to what it means to intervene in a system is to have a sensitivity to both. What are we bringing in? What are we letting go of? And how are we designing that experience so that people can grieve the things that they need to let go of, but also find joy in the things that we're moving towards. So it's a balancing act, but there is a design kind of approach that we take to that works with a lot of theory-led understandings of systems dynamics, and then a lot of inspirational kinds of creativity and methods and approaches from design that kind of come together in a really interesting way.
Thanks, Nikki. Adam, I've got a question for you. So Nikki's just given a really great description of the approach you can take around a challenge coming at it from a systems thinking perspective. I was wondering if you've got any examples of a complex sustainability challenge that you've faced, and perhaps provide some insights into some of the learnings that you took from this experience.
Yeah, so there's a couple that come to mind. There's a sort of upstream, like Chris talked about, where we're talking about growing agricultural inputs, and to resolve it in a way that becomes so if we're degenerating soil health, it's not as simple. Or we've got a challenge with a watershed, which is often a common sort of upstream agricultural challenge. It's not necessarily obvious about how you bring actors together to solve that challenge, in terms of the actual fixing either the watershed or the larger region to the larger region to sort of supply the regenerative solution. And I think this is classic sort of, we would look at it as a classic systems problem, in that you've got multiple areas that need to be worked on at the same time for that to be leveraged. And so you might have, we would often at Regenerate talk about the different capital inputs that you would need, either being human capital, social capital, and natural capital. But how do you collect those together? And I think this is sort of how we think about systems often in a business sense, is how do you bring those parts together in a way that then delivers the value that you're looking for. In an upstream sense, if you want to go to regenerative agriculture, which would be the solution to a degenerative agricultural system, you will have to, in many often deal with human capital, the knowledge of how you bring that about, and you'll also have to bring about the financial means to do that, and then also time as a factor in that. I think in a downstream case, one that we faced and we think we probably still are quite an intractable problem, is something like the fashion waste, where we have very complex drivers of consumer behavior, and also international trade markets, plus technology layering over the top to actually drive fast fashion, and very little leverage points to change that system. And so you have to think very differently about the value model that you're going to create to interrupt that system. Chris, do you have anything more to say on that? Because that's space that you've worked on as well.
Right, yeah. So like a multi-capital solution could be an interesting one to that fashion problem, and that's what we'll be exploring in the workshop. Because if you can create a social platform that creates connection and belonging for people, through which they can buy and recirculate fashion, that might allow that platform to compete on a completely different way it offers a completely different kind of value to the value currently offered in fast fashion, which is actually all about automation and incredibly quick transactional fashion. So, how that's what I just illustrating the point Adam was making about a different kind of value model and the systems thinking that helps you get to that.
That's great. Thanks both. I've got sort of two questions here that back up against each other. The first one is around or identifies that the descriptor for the labs explains that it incorporates insights from nature. So I'm interested in how those aspects manifest in the learning throughout the program. And then there's a follow-up question around that, around addressing some of the challenges in terms of the terminology and the definitions around sustainability and circular economy in the course as well. So perhaps I could get a response from one of you on the how those insights from nature are integrated into the program, and then another one around some of the challenges that we face in terms of the terminology and the language that we use, which is linked to the idea of metaphor, which is another thing that is a key feature of this lab.
Yeah.
So Adam, I might,
So
or Emma, yeah.
yeah, should I just give an overview quickly about the research that we've been doing on, developing this learning tool that, we specifically design and research for this lab. And then because Chris and Adam have been so instrumental for me personally, being inspired by drawing lessons from living systems, maybe they can talk a bit more about their innovation work in that space and how that translates from a practitioner space. Um, so we have looked at different ways of how can you really change the frame? How can you really think differently about the types of challenges that we're experiencing? And what we often see is that when we look at that direct cause and effect type of thinking, that linear thinking, that is often underpinned by seeing the world as like a machine. It uses the machine metaphor where you can control different flows and you're in control of the machine. And this often translates to what type of ideas are valued and executed in the business world as well. Metaphors really underpin heavily what we think, what we value, and therefore how we move through these transitions. And now the big challenge is, okay, we need to think differently about sustainability. How can we get to grips with complexity? And one thing that many of us have an intuitive sense of that complexity is natural systems. We often have experience, engaging in those. Even if we were a child when we engaged in those, like we have a bit of an idea how these work, and they embody complexity. So we already have parts in our brain developed that can get to grips with complexity. So how can we use those insights and those patterns of thought when we think about sustainability? And I find it from an education perspective very helpful to not just look at business as a siloed entity, but business in the economy. And this is where it led to that specific exercise, looking at a circular economy, but it's mostly to really emphasize that business is not just driving sustainability as a single entity. They do that as a whole in a wider ecosystem, which we call an economy. So we're looking at, especially on day one, we're looking at those things that we know from nature and that we've already experienced. And then how can they inform how we think about the economy? And then what kind of ideas come out of that? And how do we change what we value and what we engage in? So that is a really big bit of research that we've been doing. We've been testing this last time around, and also the effectiveness of the learning tool, and we continue to make improvements. So we're using that tool again here, 2.0, and I'm really excited to see what will happen and what kind of ideas people come up with. So now over to Adam and Chris. Maybe you want to say a bit more about your work around specifically the forest metaphor and a circular economy. Do you want to go first, Adam?
I was looking at Chris to see if he was going to press the button or not. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so there's, I think this is key in that for a long time, particularly over the 20th century, this wasn't necessarily challenged in the mainstream discourse, that we were looking at business and the wider economy as a machine, and then therefore we were maybe narrowing our view of where we were either could discover value, or where we weren't being we had a blind spot to some of the problems that now we're definitely facing. And I think the circular economy has been one of the most useful models, frameworks, to tip us into a systems view of the economy. And I think then if we go back to the living system, which heavily inspired the circular economy, it was sort of at the base of a lot of the work that of the people who brought the circular economy to life. The living system has uh, I suppose a set of principles and function that we can easily look at and understand and say, okay, if our business is doing it this way and the living system does it in a different way, then we can start to think about that as a way of informing how we might innovate.
That's great. Chris, anything to add on that? I just saw you come off mute.
I don't want to sort of delay us really, but yeah, I think it's the thinking and feeling. So Adam's talked to the sort of and Emma's talked to the thinking bit. We also might try and use living system inspiration to generate a bit of feeling, because it can be really good for kind of expanding our consciousness, if you like, to a sort of a wider awareness of a wider awareness or sort of system level consciousness. And I suppose it can do a really valuable thing where it's sort of when you're trying to build circular economies and value networks, it can be quite tactically useful to not imagine yourself at the center of it all the time. And that's kind of what we do with a lot of our sort of inside out thinking about sort of business strategies. And so it's quite useful to sort of decenter ourselves sometimes, and sort of put ourselves into a node as a node into a wider system. It's quite a helpful mental exercise. So we'll probably be doing some of that.
Fantastic. Nikki, I've got a question for you in a minute, but just before, there's another point here around the level of, I suppose, prior knowledge around sustainability systems, etc. That sort of it would be good for participants to have. So, Emma, have you got views on what people should be bringing with them to be able to participate fully in the lab?
Yeah, so there will be some essential preparation which will be shared after signing up to the lab, and you will be able to engage in that. Um, it would be helpful to have a level of prior knowledge about um, sustainability, but this is only essential, like really basic level engagement in sustainability challenges. Ideally, some insights, perhaps how your business is currently engaging in sustainability. And then I think a lot of um, a lot of the content that we will be engaging in actually allows for a variety of levels here. So even if you were to be heavily entangled in sustainability already in your business, it will help you to go to the next level and approach it from a different lens. And then if you're very new to this, this will really launch you into this different way of thinking about these problems that hopefully inform the next steps that you will take. Um, so I think it really accommodates for a variety of levels, and it will really open up also a new space for many people, even if they already had a lot of experience in sustainability from a business perspective.
Cool. So we're a very broad church. You don't have to be a world-class expert in this to be able to engage in the content or engage in any of the discussions.
No, everyone is very welcome, and also from, everyone brings a different perspective, right? It's all happening in a lot of dialogue. I would say if you are an expert in sustainability, maybe in the UK, and you have an expert in sustainability in a very different context, I mean, you both know something really different and you're contributing in your own way. But even if you are very new to this, but you have your own ecosystem of economic activity that you exist in and that your business participates in, like having some awareness of that and having some business experience, that is already good enough to engage in that type of dialogue.
That's great. We've got a very eagle-eyed uh, attendee today who spotted something in Kellyanne's quote around her attendance in the lab, which is that she mentions this combination of creativity and academic rigor. And Emma, I think that's some of the themes that are starting to come up in the answer that you just gave. Nikki, knowing that you've got a creative background, how does that combination of creativity and academic rigor manifest on the program? And perhaps as well, like what are some of the benefits of aligning those two?
Yeah, sure. It's a really great question because I think there's um, a natural tendency to think if we're being creative, we're not necessarily being academic rigorous. But the design for transitions approach, and particularly the design for just transitions approach, is really attentive to a lot of different theoretical underpinnings. So as a design approach, it is very theory led. There is a lot of rigor that underlies it, that informs the kinds of tools that we're using, the kinds of approaches that we're taking, and it very much influences the thinking, which has an impact on the doing. So, we think of design as a very doing kind of thing, but when there's a lot of that other kind of knowledge informing the doing, it changes that action. And so that theory combines across different disciplines and different theoretical spaces. And so there's a large part of that comes from transition studies. So things like the multi-level perspective and the X curve, for anyone who's particularly nerdy about the kind of the dynamics of transitions, those terms might be familiar. But then also looking at people and how people behave in systems. So things like social practice theory, critical social theories that give us a sense of the power dynamics and power relations that are happening and unfolding. And so that all sounds, quite theory heavy, but actually that's where the creativity brings a really lovely sense of balance, because your thinking is then able to inform how you play with tools, how you play with ideas. And it gives a very different kind of outcome, particularly from a design perspective. It's less about doing these things that are kind of independent and highly creative, but perhaps not connected in the way that we like to think of systemic interventions, which tend to be multi-level, in a sense that they're not just operating in a grassroots sense. They might also have connections to policy, connections to everyday life. So there are all of these different kinds of levels that we're operating at, and we're involving a lot of different people, and that naturally requires a lot of creativity, because the second you get lots of different perspectives on something, it eventuates or makes possible a lot of other options. So there's something in that becomes quite, I think, joyful. You're coming together, you've done all of this kind of very intense thinking, and then you get to do something with it, and really create and respond to what's going on. So those things kind of happen reasonably seamlessly, but there is a nice blend there that I think is, in my nerdy world, quite exciting.
Adam, you've got something to bring to this.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on Nikki's comments here, because observing her session last year and working with Nikki, I think there might be anxiety that might have to bring a creative stance to this workshop. And what I would reassure a lot of the participants is that the creativity emerges from the workshop that Nikki does. So it's and also to put maybe creativity in a broader sense. That again, I work with a lot of folk who say my art teacher told me that I couldn't draw, so therefore I'm not creative. Um, and so there's the sort of sometimes there's a lot of sort of anxiety around creative, but I think what we're talking about here is a much broader sense of connecting dots in different ways with others, and that actually should hopefully alleviate anyone who thinks they're not creative, and that this is not going to feel like, oh, I have to be a good drawer, or I have to be something like that. That is not what is required in Nikki's workshop. Right.
Thanks for clarifying that, Adam. We doodle, we don't draw.
We don't critique it.
No, we're not looking for a Mona Lisa.
There's a really interesting question that's come through, which I think touches on, again, the use of metaphors. So I'm happy for a number of people to respond to this one. And in particular, again, it links, Nikki, to the answer that you just gave around, which starts to touch on how our brains make sense of complexity. So I know that metaphor is something that comes through quite strongly across the program, and the questions come through asking sort of across the 2 days, to what extent are Eastern philosophies or indigenous worldviews touched upon as examples of different ways, perhaps, that humans make sense of complexity in their context?
That is such a wonderful question, by the way. I love that, especially because I've researched metaphors and how we think about sustainability and what these different patterns of thought are. And I think there's so much wisdom from indigenous communities, from non-Western worldviews. And sometimes they are very different from Western worldviews. And that makes it very challenging to engage in that. So it is definitely touched upon, and we're looking at a few metaphors that are from very different contexts just to show how our metaphors shape how we see the world around us, how profound that is, and how if someone is from a very different context, they will think radically different, and that may lead to more fruitful and helpful ideas that you might initially reject because of your own worldview. Um, but then when we look specifically at the tool, it is developed for people who are currently trying to come up with radically different ideas in a business context, which is often structured around a rather Western worldview. So to ensure that that can be translated, because there is otherwise this higher risk of that tension between the insights that you come up with and then your reality in your business. And we want to make sure that when you come up with radically different ideas, that you are also empowered and able to communicate that to others in your current context and that you're able to drive change in that space. So I hope that I've answered the question. I think it's a really wonderful observation. And we will be talking about that, and we will be talking about worldview. And we're really going to try to make sure that we bridge that gap between thinking radically different and thinking in an unsustainable world right now, an unsustainable system. And then how do you actually drive change? So yeah, thank you again for that question.
Yeah, thank you to the person who submitted that as well. Um, in terms of the experience of the program itself, Emma, what can participants expect from that residential format in terms of the daily schedule and activities? And I know you shared the agenda before, but perhaps some reflections on the pacing and how that's going to work.
Yes, so it will be 2 days. It will be in Mattingley Hall in Cambridge, and you will have residential accommodation for that Monday evening at Mattingley Hall, which is a very beautiful little space in Cambridge. Um, so which is really fun because we will have an action-packed day on that Monday. We will be starting in the morning and we will have different sessions, and they will be following on each other, but there are also breaks in between. There are some refreshment breaks. We will have lunch together and dinner together in their dining hall. Um, and then in the evening, that's usually such a good opportunity also to really have a chat with each other, but also with the speakers who often stay over. And um, Nora Bateson, who is our keynote, she will be around, and having these more informal conversations as well around the content. I think that's always super valuable, sharing that downtime together. And then the next day, we'll be running till about, I would say, 5:15 in the afternoon. So we have a full day of sessions till then. And these sessions are not just sitting down and listening to a lecturer. These are highly interactive. They're workshops specifically, but if we have more of a lecture style bit of teaching, then very often the person who gives that lecture will also ask questions to the participants in the room, or they ask that you share some of your insights or your views with smaller groups or in twos. So it is very interactive. It keeps you on your toes, and it also allows you to then translate those insights into your very specific business context and reflect on, okay, what does this mean for you specifically? Yeah, so it's always really wonderful and special to share that time all together.
Thanks, Emma. And it might be good, or it will be good to get some reflections from Adam and Chris, as well as people who have been faculty on the systems thinking labs that we've run in the past, about how you've observed that journey that the participants go on across those 2 days, and what are some of the highlights, I suppose, of programs past that give a flavour of what people can expect from the lab that we're holding in March.
Yeah, I think I've just stressed I've stressed the sort of the learn by doing aspect to it. So you will practice, building system ideas and using systems practice to do that. So it'll be that's the best way to learn. So there'll be plenty of that, and obviously the theory as well, but very much a kind of learn by doing, which will make it memorable, and it all kind of comes together, which is, I guess, it's systemic quality.
Adam,
I
I
anything
think
to
always
what,
share
find
from
that
your
there is a
experience?
bit of a journey of like day one, that everyone is like, we really break open that space of like how you show up and your lived experience and your culture is all very much underpinning what you think. So if you reflect on that, like, you kind of break open this whole space of like ideas and ways of showing up. And then I feel like, especially, and maybe Nikki, you should talk a bit more about Nora Bateson's keynote that evening as well. So I think that especially with that keynote, that kind of comes to that, ultimate moment of like, wow, if we start approaching this in a different way, like, this is so empowering, but also so different. And then day two, that's the answer to all of that. So we're really looking at, okay, you're in a business, you don't own, the supply chain, the business, the whole system, but you have so much agency in all of this. How do you want to use your powers? And it really brings back that agency into the mix. So I always like those 2 days and how they balance out those narratives. Yeah.
That's a great space then for participants to be in at the conclusion of the lab, sort of having a full appreciation of their agency within the various systems that they operate within. Emma, you mentioned Nora's, uh, um, I was going to say participation, but I suppose it is
Nora
Nora's
Bateson's
involvement.
keynotes. Yeah.
Yes, her involvement in the lab. Now, Nikki, I understand you work quite closely with Nora, so I was wondering if perhaps you had any thoughts or ideas what Nora might be talking about during her keynote.
Thanks, Tom. I it is always there's always an element of surprise, I think, where when Nora will come in, because she will get a sense of what's been transpiring and respond. She's got this really wonderful way of kind of picking up and putting back out. But I think the thing that strikes me as so wonderful about what Nora brings is this intergenerational knowledge and wisdom about systems. She has taken her father, Gregory Bateson's ideas into expanded spaces as well. And I think, this conversation we were having earlier about creativity and academic rigor, Nora is like the embodiment of that. She is a creative practitioner. She's an artist. She's a poet. She's a writer. Um, and there's a lot of really rigorous theoretical thinking that comes from systems that really informs a lot of what she's doing. So it is a different approach that she takes, and I think the idea that we're not kind of pointing at the thing and saying this is about sustainability. She will give a talk that will arrive at that, and you will come to it, but it's not direct. And I think that's the beauty of the approach, not only from Norrin but from Batesonian thinking in general. It's not direct like that. It is second order, third order, really being conscious that we can't always just come straight at something. And so it does prompt us to think differently. And I think that's the wonderful thing. You kind of you'll come into this talk, and it might start with I think last year she talked about some different artwork and these kinds of scripts and patterns, or lack thereof, or how we make sense of the things that we see in these kind of these movements, ink-based movements. And so there's something really interesting about what that tells us about patterns and emergence and systems dynamics. So we're not kind of looking straight at the thing, we're coming to it differently. So I think it's such a warm approach, and Nora's approach is often encapsulated in the warm data labs that she runs. And so the idea that the experience with Nora is also warm and joyous and weird sometimes. There's something kind of nice about that, because it is this balance of creativity and rigor that kind of comes out in a different way, and so it allows you to see things and think about things differently.
Thanks, Nikki. Emma, you mentioned when you were describing the program earlier that it was sort of we're a broad church, in terms of the level of understanding that delegates sort of have as they walk into the doors. Will the lab is designed to encourage people and to support people at whatever stage of learning and knowledge that they have. Um, there's a question that's come through around along those lines, around any preparations that you'd recommend ahead of the lab. What can participants expect in terms of material that might help them get in the mood, I suppose, for the 2-day program?
Yeah, so I mean, we will have a package of essential preparation, like ready. And this also consists of a systems thinking glossary that Nikki actually created. I don't know if you remember it, Nikki, but that was for last time that lab, with all the key things that we may use, the key words and things that we refer to, and then what they mean, just to feel confident that this is accessible and you can, you know, join that dialogue. Um, there will be a little exercise that we crafted together with Chris and Adam, and we will ask participants to go into nature and make some observations, and we will use those observations during one of the workshops. And if there is like maybe we can do a quick round if we have like any recommended reading that, just as a fun thing if you want to engage in the topic. So my recommended reading is a book from Fritjof Capra. It is, I think, from 2016, and I have it like right above me, and it's called A Systems View of Life. It's written on an undergraduate level, so it's really accessible, but that whole shift that they explain from mechanistic thinking towards systems thinking and ecological thinking is beautifully explained in there in such an accessible way. So that would be like my recommended reading if people want to prepare. Maybe we have some other recommended reads.
I'm going to jump in and actually,
Yeah.
instead of reading, I'm going to encourage those that are coming to go and observe the natural world as deeply as they are comfortable, and to see how the natural world interacts. I think there is so much to be learnt by observing what's happening in the living system, that's where instead I would encourage that.
Shall I
It
go?
was, yeah,
Two
go,
books
Chris.
on organizational systems as complex systems. One is a book that Adam gave me, I think, Team of Teams by an American Special Forces general called, I think, General Stanley McChrystal, and then also this book by an academic and designer called Dan Hill called Dark Matter and Trojan Horses, which is kind of about the systems that can start to emerge when you know how to look for them and you start to try and change systems. That's the dark matter bit that you discover the forces at work that lock you in to the old system.
Thanks,
I love
Chris.
that. I'm going to read that. I haven't read that before.
That's
I
a good.
tried to
You're
demonstrate.
the third recommendation I've had on that book in the last
Do you?
month. Yeah, that's amazing. Mine would be Sand Talk by Tyson Yunkaporta, which gives an Indigenous perspective on systems, particularly Aboriginal. There you go, Tom's holding it up for us. There are two things that I really love about this book. One is that it reflects not only the Indigenous perspective of systems, but it's that looking at um, white views or Western views of systems through that Indigenous lens, and I think that brings a lot of insight that you may not otherwise kind of see in some of the systems oriented literature. The other thing I love about it is that in order to write each chapter, he creates an artifact. And the artifact embodies all of the knowledge that he then imparts in very linear, traditional Western kind of text form. But it's that artifact that allows him to hold on to his Aboriginality and to his own culture and to represent the way that feels right to him, so that he doesn't lose that aspect of himself in responding in a kind of a more Western format, the book format. Brilliant read, loads of insights in that one.
I love that I've two of those books that have been mentioned I've had on my bookshelf here. I was able to share one of them successfully. The other one, Team of Teams, just came up as a blank thing. One of the things that I remember from reading Sand Talk, and I think Tyson's got a new book out in the last year or so, was he talks about the food system and that we often think about as we get into the colder months here in the UK where we are. That's a time when you have chicken soup, and he talks about how the quality of the fat that you get in a chicken varies throughout the year because obviously what the chicken is eating changes as well. And so one of the reasons why chicken soup is sort of has sort of restorative benefits in during winter is because of what the chicken is eating at that time of year, and so it doesn't quite translate when you're eating it at other times of the year. But he sort of back casts, if you like, all the way back to what the chicken's eating, and then what are the things that the chicken's eating, what are they eating, and you understand, we get an insight into this broad system that's at play and how that manifests in, something that's highly relevant for people who happen to be eating chicken soup in winter. I've
I
got a
love
couple
that
more.
because you just explained like second order and third order thinking through chicken soup, which is
Yeah.
something that we will be addressing in the lab.
Yeah, exactly. We've got a few minutes left, and there are a couple of extra questions as well. Emma, this one's for you, I think, which is, how is the course tailored to accommodate professionals from different industries and sectors? So you've talked about, different levels of understanding about complexity and sustainability, but what about people that have, that are working across different industries?
Yes, so this is a really big part of how we organize our teaching at CISL in general. So most of our delegates are mid to senior professionals, already quite a lot of lived experience, a lot of professional experience as well, can sometimes be new to sustainability, but some are quite experienced in sustainability. And that is kind of our, I would say for CISL, our target audience, right? So during this lab, we very much build on a diversity of insights as well. So again, it's not just about diversity of sector, it's also about diversity of lived experience and how you view the world, and having those dialogues to really unpack what that means. So having these sessions where we actively bring in people's perspective and also people their insights in how different systems work in different places in the world, really help contribute to the learning. So we actively leverage that, not just cater to it. Like it's a really important part of the peer-to-peer learning.
Thanks, Emma. In terms of, there are a couple of questions around the pragmatics of signing up to the program itself. So we understand that there have been some issues with the QR code that Emma shared in her slides. There is a link to the URL. There is a link to the URL that you can use that will take you to the Leadership Labs page on the CISL website, which has a link to apply, and you can send us in your applications. There's a question here, if we're unable to, oh, sorry, the question, my screen's just gone funny. Yeah, so what, so there's a question around what if the remaining places, because Emma, you mentioned that we've already sold a number of allocations on this program already. What happens if the remaining spaces are taken before I can apply? Is there something that people can do at that point?
So you can sign up early, um, and you can try to get in as soon as possible. Also keep in mind, if you are an alumni and one of our students, you get a discount as well. So make sure you highlight that in your application form. Once we are full, we will start a waiting list. We can then either, depending on that waiting list, make decisions whether it's possible to create a slightly bigger cohort, or if anyone drops out, that someone else will be able to take that place. Because it's really important for us to also keep a learning environment that's quite intimate. We don't want to have this as a very massive, lab. There's so much power in actually coming together in a manageable group. So yeah, I think the best thing to do is to see if you can sign up. Think it over, over the next couple of weeks, and then I think we will start to fill up this course. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think you mentioned it as well, but Rosalind's asked if there is a discount available for Cambridge alumni. Yes, there is. Just let us know that you're a Cambridge alumni, and we'll validate that. But there is a discounted rate for people who have already joined us on other programs. We're at time, so just to say that I've pasted the link to the application page in the chat, so feel free to use that as well. We've had a number of questions asking. I think we should have started a book club, and we may have to at the end of the
Why
lab as
don't
well.
we
So
all put our recommendations in the LinkedIn events page? And also, if you're watching this now live and you have a good recommendation, put it in there and we all come together with our book recommendations or experience recommendations like Adam did.
Fantastic. All right. We're at time, so I think this has been a really valuable experience, certainly for me anyway, to understand a little bit more around our faculty and to share some insights into what people can expect from the lab. So as Emma mentioned before, a great way to avoid missing out is to sign up early. The link is in the chat, and we hope to see as many of you on the program as we can. So thank you very much for all your time today.
Thank you, Tom, for moderating.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.